Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Fiverr Talks. As always, my name is Joel Young, and today we're asking, what's up with tips on Fiverr? How do you get them? Should you worry about them? And who are they really for? That's right, today on What's Up Wednesday, we're asking the question, what's up with tips on Fiverr? And if you're new to the platform, you may be asking yourself, we have tips? We can get tips? I didn't know that was a thing. And let me tell you, it is a thing. In the early days, I used to have a separate gig that was simply called a tip gig or a tip jar, where I would send a link to someone, so if I did a great job, they could actually tip me over there in a separate gig. But now, starting multiple years ago, Fiverr has integrated the gratuity process into the review process, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But before we jump in, I just want to say that I find the whole practice of tipping to be a bit confusing. And that's why I think it's such a curious and interesting thing that it's leaking into the creative services industry, something that I'm really excited about. But I find it interesting that there are some kind of services and businesses and opportunities where tips are the norm. Like at a restaurant, or if you're at a hotel and someone's carrying in your bags, or if you're at maybe a barber or a hairstylist, places like that where gratuity is kind of expected or more the norm. And then there are other services that it's just never considered. And I think creative services is one of those that was in the dark for many years, and really there was no way for a freelancer to receive a tip in days before even electronic submission, because it was all, you would invoice somebody for your work and they weren't going to say, oh, you invoiced me for $350, but here's $375. You know, that just didn't happen. And so this is what I believe to be a new modern development for creative services, to where people will look at creative work you've done, outside of the box work, things that are intangible, and say, wow, they served me well. They really did good. They deserve a tip. And that's kind of a cool thing. So I think it's cool that we get to talk about this, because Fiverr has now integrated it into their platform and kind of all that stuff. So what I thought I would do today is I would just ask a series of questions that people have asked me about tips on Fiverr in general. And I'll just answer those and give you some information about tips and how we should view them and how we can use them, and all the logistics and technicals about tips on Fiverr that we can talk about today. But before we do that, I think it's time for today's question of the day. Okay, so for our question of the day today, I'd like to know, have you ever been tipped? And if you have, what's the biggest tip you've ever received? That's a pretty cool thing to brag about. Leave us your comments down below. Tag them with QOTD, that's question of the day, so we all know that you're answering the question of the day. And now let's get back to my questions and answers about tips on Fiverr. That's right, and thank you, me. It's time for these questions that we have about tips. And the first one that everybody wants to know is, how do I receive a tip on Fiverr? Well, like I alluded to at the beginning of the video, it's much easier than it used to be, and you don't actually have to do anything to be eligible for a tip or receive a tip. It's something that just happens if it happens. In the old days, I had to have a separate gig, something that was basically a virtual tip jar, and I would have to send that link to my buyers in a delivery message, hope they see it and thought, oh, hey, he did a great job, I'll leave him a tip, and throw in a few bucks there. But today, it's actually built into the review process on your gigs. So if you deliver a gig, deliver work to your buyer, and they say, great, everything looks good, we're all done, or maybe you revise something and they say, great, looks good now, they have to go and leave you a rating or review on the work by clicking that button at the bottom of the gig that says, are you ready to complete this or close this project? If they click yes, they're going to be taken to the review funnel, is what I like to call it, because it's a series of questions over a series of pages where they're going to ask them the specifics for, about their experience, would they recommend, how accurate was it to what they expected it to be based on your gig description, all these things. And as they leave their review, the last question in that funnel, in that process is, would you like to leave a tip for your seller? And it even offers some percentages, based on percentages, some suggestions for what they could leave you. Here's what it would be if it was 10% or 15 or 20, and even gives them a field to leave a custom tip. So it's an integrated part of the review process. So you don't have to do anything to receive a tip. The only thing you have to do is provide great service, have someone actually be willing to go through the review or rating process and find it at the end and say, you know what, he or she did a great job. I'm going to leave them a little extra gratuity. And this is not on my questions, but I'll just make it a caveat, kind of a bonus tip, if you will. If you receive a tip from a buyer, you will be notified and you should say thank you. Hey, that was unexpected. That's awesome. You're amazing. Thank you so much for leaving me a tip. If you ever need any other help with anything else, please come back and let me know. I will be so happy to help you. That's a really great response. I think it's really poor manners on our behalf as sellers if we don't at least thank a buyer for a tip, because then they might just think it went out into the ether. Did Fiverr get that money? Did they get that money? I don't know. Maybe I'm never going to do that again. Make sure that you thank people when they leave you a tip, so you don't have to do anything to receive one, but deliver excellent service. And once you do receive one, you should say thank you. Now, here's a common question that I get about tips. Should I be asking for tips? And this is really not a black and white answer. The answer is not yes or no. The answer is yes in a way. Yes, sort of, kind of. Here's how I handle it. That'll just give you an idea of what I think most people should do, because I'm doing it the way I think you should do it and the way you should approach it. You should never come with the assumption that anyone owes you a tip. This is one thing that frustrates me about the restaurant industry, is that industry is set up as though servers are owed a tip. And certainly I want people to be paid well, but I'd rather be paying a little bit more for my dinner and them get a better wage than for us to be forced to give people tips so that they can actually make a decent wage, even when their service is bad. Because the whole idea, and off my soapbox now, the whole idea of a tip is that you're being paid something extra that is not owed you because you did an excellent job, an outstanding job. So should you be asking for tips? Not directly. Not really. You shouldn't be saying, hey, leave me a tip because I know I did a great job. You should be saying it as a question, and really just presenting it as an opportunity rather than a demand. The way I do it is I simply say, hey, if you feel that I have served you well, if you feel that the product you received was outstanding, that it was better than you expected, you can say thank you by leaving a tip. I never actually say, hey, please go leave me a tip, because that's not only poor manners, but it's kind of just making a whole lot of assumptions, and that's just a whole mess of junk you don't want to get into. But phrase it like a question. Like, if you felt really well served, the way you can say thank you is by leaving a tip. And most buyers might not even know, before you saying that they could do such a thing. So no, I don't think you should be asking for them. What I think you should be doing is presenting an opportunity to those who feel well served to say thank you through a tip. And I think that's the way you need to phrase it. That the way you can tell me that I did an extra special, awesome, great job for you, or you're extra pleased, is to leave a tip. That's the way you say thank you. And kind of clarifying those terms is helpful, not only for you to receive more tips, but for your buyers to know, what really helps you feel appreciated. Here's another question I get all the time. Should I do extra work for the promise of tips? And I find this to be just a really, it feels like a dirty ask from a buyer. Hey, I know I didn't pay for this, but if you can just do this extra service that you really should be paid for, I'll leave you a tip at the end. I'll leave you a big tip. If I got a big tip from every buyer who ever said they were going to leave me a big tip, I'd be a very, very much more wealthy man. Like, that's just not the way it works out most of the time. People promise to leave big tips for extra work, and then, not to seem like I've lost my faith in humanity, but a lot of them don't. I believe that people should pay the fees for the services you're going to provide. So ask them to pay what it costs. Don't do extra work for the promise of tips. If you're okay doing that work for free in hopes that you might get a tip, fine, go ahead and do that work, but assume that you're doing that work for free as a way to service your customers better. And then if you get a tip, hey, it's just gravy. It's just icing on the cake, right? But don't do actual legitimate work thinking that someone leaving you a tip at the end is going to be the payment that is owed for that work, because a lot of people just don't follow through with what they say they're going to do, and it's not a really good system. It's better to send them an add-on offer right there and say, oh, you don't need to leave a tip at the end. You can just pay for that right now. It's the same exact process. So don't do extra work for the promise of tips, because you just can't bank on tips actually coming through. Even if people say, yeah, I'm going to do it, I'll do it. They forget, or they don't know how, or they just don't intend to, and they might be lying to you. Here's a couple more, just a few more at the end. I think this is important to know. People are always saying this on Twitter. This is where it comes out of a lot of times, but you should also be aware that the answer to the question, does Fiverr take a cut out of the tip, is yes. Fiverr does take their 20% out of even the gratuity that buyers leave for sellers. I don't know why. It seems ridiculous to me. They get 20% of the entire transaction. If someone wants to leave a tip, that should just be for sellers. That's my opinion. If you got an opinion on this, leave it down below in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. But to me, tips are for buyers. They're not for the platform. The platform got their cut already. But I could also see on the other side, on Fiverr side, if they didn't charge 20% commission on the tip, people might try to circumvent that and say, I'll do this gig for $10, but a $200 tip, and then they only pay 20% on the $10. So I get it from Fiverr's perspective. What else are you going to do? But it just kind of feels dirty. They're taking 20% commission for the project, but then also part of your gratuity, and they're also taking a service fee on the gratuity from the buyer, so they're double dipping on both ends on both sides. But it's just like a regular transaction. Try not to focus on it, get too mad about it, because we can have opinions about it, just won't change it. But I guess I can see kind of how that works. It still stings just a little bit more than it should. Okay, it looks like I'm out of questions. I thought I had one more, but I'll summarize it with this by saying, tips are something that should be a nice surprise at the end of a very well-run project. They're not something that should feel forced upon anyone. They shouldn't be done or assumed in any position or in any way. They're something that should be icing on the cake, cherry on top, something that should just be, a pleasant little way to end a project that you did really well on. So if they don't just happen naturally, there's nothing you can do to force that. I would encourage you, though, if you don't already have this in your delivery message, your delivery quick response that we talked about in our last video on Monday, you should definitely include something in there about tips that, hey, if you felt you were well served, you could consider leaving me a tip as a way to say thank you, things like that, because you want people to know that that opportunity is there if they'd like to take advantage of it. But don't plan on them. Don't assume them, and certainly don't expect them for extra work you're going to do. Make sure you get paid up front. Hey, I hope this has been a helpful What's Up Wednesday for you as we talk about tips on Fiverr. Yet another nuance, a way to increase your income by doing really great work, but something we need to understand well in order to utilize on the platform. As always, my name has been Joel Young. It always will be Joel Young. I'm seller DJ Young on Fiverr. I've been full-time on there since 2013, and I've really been able to learn a lot over the years, and I am so excited getting to share all that with you here on the YouTube channel. You're a fantastic bunch. You're growing every week. This community is getting bigger, so make sure that you're following along, reading the comments, leaving your own. Make sure you're contributing and helping each other out as I'm trying to help out. And if you want to go deeper, you can always do that at patreon.com/DJYoung. Become a Fiverr Talks Insider and you'll get exclusive videos from me every Friday. If not, I'll see you back here on Monday for another Fiverr Talks Motivation Monday. And until then, keep doing, because the future favors the doers.